in terms of respect, because of the usual channels to allow a free vote, will allow all members to vote.
They're quite entitled to do so if they wish. Right, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I beg to move that the committee has considered the Abortion Northern Ireland Regulations 2022. In opening this debate, I would like to acknowledge and respect the deeply held views that we will have on this issue. And I'm glad that the decision of the usual has been made in terms of respect because of those views. I'm glad the decision of the usual channels to allow a free vote will allow according to their conscience. I also want to again say that I'd like to recognise the clear will at the same time of this House for the government to deliver on its statutory duty with respect to access to abortion services in Northern Ireland. In passing the Northern Ireland Executive Formation Act of 2019, this House decided it was time to step in and ensure women's access to services. In line with the recommendations made by the 2018 report of CEDAW, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Colleagues will recall there have been previous debates in 2009, 2020, and the outcome of these debates today's debate is not about reopening the ethical issues decided on by this House in those debates. In just a moment, I'm going to make progress to start with. To ensure the implementation of abortion services in Northern Ireland. There were emphatic votes on this topic in 2019, 20 and 21 that show the will of this House is to implement the abortion services in Northern Ireland. Happy to give one.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Thank you. And for the way in which he's introduced so far. Could the Secretary of State, however, place on record that he does accept that the regulations today that we are voting on takes the law in Northern Ireland far beyond what applies in England and Wales? Is that the case?
This was, again, this specific point was voted back in 2020, and I recognise that some people do have concerns. The Honourable Gentleman has outlined that the regulations go beyond what's in Great Britain. I have to say that provision that was agreed in 2020 was determined as the most appropriate way by ensuring that women in victims of sexual crime have access to services. And I would also say that with decisions that the Parliament has made literally in the last couple of months, there is also argument that this doesn't go as far as the rest of the UK yet. Chair, I would like to take this opportunity also to put on record my thanks to the medical professionals who have ensured women and girls have had some local access to abortion services up to this point, and to the organisations that have supported this work, many of whom I've met. I do not underestimate the huge efforts that have been made to provide limited abortion services since April 2020. And I have to say I've been hugely impressed when meeting with organisations who have tirelessly advocated for healthcare services and helped to sustain the limited services currently and the work that they do to support women and girls. 31st 20 and 31st of January 2022, some 2,794 abortions were able to take place as a result of that excellent work in Northern Ireland. However, the services in place still fall far short of what is required by law. Women and girls are still unable to access high-quality abortion and post-abortion care locally in Northern Ireland in the same way that women can in the rest of the United Kingdom. And that's because the Northern Ireland Department of Health has failed to make progress on this issue. The commissioning of full abortion services consistent with the conditions set out in the 2020 regulation, CEDAW recommendations, has not taken place. Every day, women and girls are being put in vulnerable situations, and we mustn't, and I will not, allow this situation to continue. I have a duty, a legal duty, to implement those CEDAW recommendations to ensure that women and girls have access to abortion services, and I will take all necessary steps to ensure that this happens.
On your legal duty, Secretary?
Yeah, absolutely.
Secretary of State for giving way of his legal duty. Since the House met and voted on these matters, the House has also voted on and approved the Down Syndrome Act. Has the Secretary of State taken legal advice as to whether or not the Act rights of abortions of fetus with Down syndrome?
Look, I have to say we've continually taken legal advice around the whole process of this bill, and we are, and I'll come on to in a moment some of the expert advice about the commissioning of the appropriate services. The regulations we're taking today are legally correct and do fulfil the recommendations and the legal obligations on the government. And I would say in my statement of the 24th of March, I committed to return to this House and to make regulations after the Northern Ireland Assembly election. If no progress had at that point, or at this point as it were, been made towards the delivery of abortion services by the Northern Ireland Department of Health. I've now made these regulations to make sure that the will of this House is respected. Chair, I don't take this decision lightly, and I remain fully committed to protecting what I know many colleagues and I feel is important, which is the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in all of its dimensions. The devolution settlement, however, does not absolve the government of its clear statutory duty, nor my department of our legal duty as set by Parliament, let alone what I do believe is the moral duty to make sure that people, women and girls across the UK have equal access to good quality healthcare and support. We've given the Department of Health in Northern Ireland and the Northern Ireland Initiative every possible chance to move forward. Indeed, we could be criticised for having given them two already. And we have engaged extensively to see how we could best support delivery, but the Department of Health at this stage has failed to act. It has always been my expectation and preference that the Department of Health would drive forward commissioning of abortion services with the relevant policy and operational expertise to do so, and to ensure that the services, abortion services, become normalised and embedded into the health and social care system in Northern Ireland as part of the healthcare service. The government's actions to this point clearly reflect this expectation. In 2020, we delivered a framework for the Department of Health to deliver service within. Services, however, were not commissioned. In 2021, we made the abortion regulations. These provided me with the power to direct that action be taken where it's required to implement the recommendations in paragraphs 85 and 86 of the CEDAW report. In July 2021, I directed the Department of Health to commission and ensure the full provision of abortion services by no later than 31st of March 2022. Services have still not, however, been commissioned. It was only once it became clear that this deadline would not be met on the 24th of March that I made a commitment to return to Parliament after the Assembly election to make regulations on abortion if necessary. Following this commitment, these regulations were laid before the House on the 19th of May. This statutory instrument has the following effects, and I think it's just important to outline exactly what this achieves. Firstly, it removes the need for Executive Committee approval before services can be commissioned and funded by the Department of Health. The regulations do this by providing that directions under the Abortion Northern Ireland Regulations of 2021, which require action to be taken to implement the recommendations of the CEDAW report, must be complied with if the matter has been discussed or agreed by the Executive Committee. Further, secondly, it's upon a Secretary of State the power to do anything that a Northern Ireland Minister or Department could do for the purpose of ensuring CEDAW compliance. For the purpose of determining what a Northern Ireland Minister or Department could do, any need for Executive Committee approval will be disregarded. And this means the Department of Health will have no further barriers to commission and fund services, and that we can act as UK Government and as Secretary of State to commission. I'm still clear that the Department of Health should drive forward the commissioning of abortion services without delay, and that as a devolved matter, it does remain responsibility to fund and provide those services. And I will continue to engage with the Minister of Health and his department, and I've asked my officials to continue their engagement. We are keen to work with the Minister to support him in the Department of Health's delivery of services. However, the Department of Health must now provide an absolute commitment to provide services, or I will use the powers in these regulations to commission services myself. To ensure... yes, absolutely. Sorry.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State giving way, and I am supportive of what he is doing today. But he will be aware, in his introductory comments, that there is some frustration at the length of time this process is taking. And while obviously the Secretary has to give some space to the Department of Health to do this, can he give some indication of the timetable for which he will let this run before he directly intervenes to ensure that services are uniformly provided across Northern Ireland?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Chair. And I appreciate the comments of the Honourable Gentleman, and it's almost like his question was perfectly timed. He just about to say, in answer to his question, to ensure that I have all the information in the circumstances where I will need to take action myself, and I suspect I will be taking action, a small team has been established in my office, the Line Office, to work alongside the Department of Health to take this forward. So to answer his question directly, look, I don't want to give I can't give a specific date right now, but what we have done is we have brought a team of experts into the Northern Ireland office to work on how to commission and what those services will be. That's got to be correct, and there are experts in the field. They are working through to deliver that at the moment. Because of the experience we've had with the Department of Health in Northern Ireland, much as I would like to see them deliver this in the next few weeks, I'm not necessarily expecting that. As soon as our team have developed the commissioning and the work that needs to be done to commission the services, if the Department of Health have not already acted, we will take action immediately that we are ready. So I envisage that quickly, but I wouldn't want to give it, and I'm happy to keep him and others up to speed with that timeline. Yes,
I just wanted to say I'm very grateful to the answer he's given, and I think that is a very clear and precise answer, and I think that will give people some considerable reassurance. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that, and I think we have all waited for far too long. As I say, I think hope reinforces my point that I want to see this done through the proper devolved measure, but ultimately we've got to make sure that women and girls are getting access to care. I've seen too many harrowing cases and very, very sad cases of what people have had to go through. They should never have to go through to get good health care, and we need to correct that. Chair, I'm just going to make a bit of progress. Chair, I recognise that this is a sensitive and a personal issue for many people. Indeed, we've heard many different views in this House in the debates that we have had, as well as from members of the Northern Ireland Assembly in relation to abortion, and I absolutely respect people's views. However, women should not be forced as they are to choose forced into very, very difficult situations by a lack of safe, local, high-quality healthcare. That isn't right. This situation simply
also the question for the Honourable Member of Down, who has also pressed the issue of timing, and I welcome all comments that the Secretary of State has made about a team in the Northern Ireland office taking this forward. I absolutely can't give dates, but we do want to be very informed of what is happening. I know that others have warned about current postcode lottery for the provision and the vulnerable position this leaves those that need an abortion in. And it's imperative that the commissioning process is concluded as soon as possible so that services are in line with the recent new framework and fully accessible to all that need them. We all work with many organisations supporting women in Northern Ireland and welcome these proposals. Our plea for the swift commissioning of these services must be heeded. Women cannot wait any longer. In 2021, there were 63 terminations of a pregnancy in Northern Ireland, and over 370 women still had to travel to England to have an abortion under the funding scheme put in place by the UK government. 370 women who needed to travel at a time of extreme stress and upset to get a procedure that should be available to them close to home, close to their friends, close to their families and their support network instead of hundreds of miles away alone. People do say that this is an emotive issue and we all appreciate that. But as the Secretary of State has outlined today in his speech, we are not here to reopen those ethical issues today. This is a matter of practicalities. The law is the law, and this is about delivery of that law. So that brings me to my questions for the Secretary of State, which I hope he will be able to address in his closing remarks. Now, we know the saying that necessity is the mother of invention. In the COVID pandemic, we saw an increase in the use of telemedicine, both in Great Britain and in Northern Ireland. And whilst this has been made permanent in other parts of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland's provision has been removed. The reasons for women to choose telemedicine are wide-ranging, but they are all valid, and to deny the women of Northern Ireland that choice seems very arbitrary. And I would like assurances from the Secretary of State to reinstate telemedicine services as part of these measures. I'd be interested also in what assessment his department has made about the parity of access to services across the different commissioning bodies in Northern Ireland. I'm a very big supporter of having all of the data to hand so that we can make the best decisions for women and girls. And I would be interested to hear the Secretary of State's thoughts on any assessments that have been made. And I'd like to take this opportunity to request a cross-party meeting between the Secretary of State, myself, and some of the groups that are supporting the situation. I acknowledge that he says he has met with some groups, but I know that there are others I'd like to be part of those conversations. I know Amnesty is documenting the barriers in policy and practice to accessing abortion services in Northern Ireland, which will track the progress pre and post commissioning, and engagement with this work should be important to the NIO, and I hope that the Secretary of State will be able to agree to a meeting in his remarks. If that meeting was to go ahead, I think that it would be really useful for the Secretary of State to hear about the support that the NGOs are providing across Northern Ireland, and I would hope that he would be able to offer them some financial support so he can continue to help women and girls. I'd also like to ask the Secretary of State about the specifics of Regulation 5, financial assistance. I would appreciate more detail on how the government are planning to get this assistance to women who need it, who will be administering this financial help, and what the role for third-party groups and charities would be. Now, further to that, can the Secretary of State outline the steps he is going to implement immediately to secure these fragile abortion services? As I've said previously, we appreciate the comments that he has made, and we also would like to thank the medical profession and the organisations that have provided the services thus far. Further to that, in the absence of a functioning executive, has the Secretary of State explored the budgetary implications of putting these measures in place? The history of the executive failing to deliver on abortion rights is well documented, and this provision of healthcare must not be dependent on their delivery. But I know about working with the Department of Health, and his intervention may be needed, but we also want that to be as swift as possible. The Labour Party welcomes these steps to protect the rights of women across Northern Ireland, and I hope that we will never, ever get back into a situation which saw a Northern Irish Health Minister launching an investigation into every abortion carried out where the mental health of a woman was a reason for the abortion. It's all, unfortunately, a little bit Handmaid's Tale. Women deserve the right to choose what happens to their bodies, and they can't wait any longer to see these measures put in place. But I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for the work he has done thus far. Thank you, Chair.
Carla Loughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For as long as powers have been devolved to Stormont, the people of Northern Ireland have been granted the right to decide their own laws in relation to abortion. It is therefore very regrettable that in 2019 a group of MPs, none of whom are accountable to the people in Northern Ireland, decided that they would take matters into their own hands, ignoring the devolution settlement. Today we see the outworkings of that decision. This is the latest chapter in disenfranchising the people of Northern Ireland, and in truth, in reality, it is actually much worse than that. These regulations make sweeping and far-reaching constitutional change. The constitutional settlement of Northern Ireland is being changed by regulation. We are constantly told that the Belfast Agreement cannot be changed, yet those who shout loudest about the immutability of the Belfast Agreement are the very people who support these regulations. Let us be clear about what these regulations do. If passed, these regulations will fundamentally alter the principles of the Belfast Agreement. It is clear that the Belfast Agreement can easily be changed when it suits the political expedience of some members of this House. Mr. Chairman, I wish to address three areas in my remarks. One, the issue itself and the views of the people of Northern Ireland who I represent, the constitutional significance of these regulations, and the issues concerning future executive budgets and funding. Northern Ireland has constitutionally taken a different approach from the rest of the UK. That, of course, is the nature and beauty of devolution. Not once has the Northern Ireland Assembly, or indeed a majority of members of this House representing the constituencies of Northern Ireland, voted to back a change in the law as it relates to abortion. Northern Ireland has always had different laws to the United Kingdom because that reflects the views of the people who live there. Yet in 2019 the law was changed, not through full legislative scrutiny. Rather, like everything that has taken place concerning this issue over the last 3 years, legislative change has been brought about through the back door. Opinion polling undertaken in 2019 after the change in law showed that a majority of people in Northern Ireland opposed those changes. A lucid talk poll conducted at that time found 52% of the public opposed the legislation of abortion and only 39% supported it. Despite the views in Ireland, the government is again pressing with changing the law in a way that people I represent oppose. This would not be acceptable in any other part of the United Kingdom, and it is unacceptable in Northern Ireland as well. This is an issue for the Northern Ireland Assembly and Executive to agree and implement. Just because some members of this House disagree should not give them the right to simply take matters into their own hands. This House should respect the people of Northern Ireland. Which brings me to my second point, the constitutional ramifications of the 2022 regulations. The Northern Ireland Act is clear. Matters that are significant and cross-cutting are for the Northern Ireland Executive to decide. This issue is clearly significant and cross-cutting and is therefore not one for the Minister of Health to decide alone. The powers of the Northern Ireland Executive are not absolute, and the Secretary of State, by virtue of Section 26 of the Northern Ireland Act, does have power and direct a minister. However, this power is limited in scope to decisions that would be incompatible with international law, the protection of public order or national security. These regulations fall a long way short of the test laid down in the Northern Ireland Act. Clearly, these regulations change the substance of the Belfast Agreement and the Northern Ireland Act, but these changes are not in primary legislation, could be scrutinised and debated fully. Rather, fundamental constitutional change is proposed by regulation. The Secretary of State presents this as changing the Northern Ireland Act in a limited and specific way, but that is simply not the case. These regulations set a precedent. Matters that are significant or controversial in Northern Ireland are a matter for the Executive for very good reason. It is important that all communities in Northern Ireland are included in the debate. These regulations fly in the face of that constitutional guarantee and give power to the Secretary of State to make any decision ignoring the will and the will of the people of Northern Ireland. These regulations permit the Secretary of State to become a minister in Northern Ireland without any scrutiny or accountability. But these regulations are more troubling than that. Where does the power of the Minister of Health and the Secretary start? What would trigger these regulations being implemented? Who do civil servants take instruction from? When can the Secretary of State counter-demand direction of the Minister? The regulations are vague and unclear, could lead to a lack of clarity and conflict within the Department of Health. These regulations stand in contrast to the view the Secretary of State took when the Assembly was suspended for 3 years in 2017. One party brought the institution down, decisions were needed, budgets were neglected, and the Secretary of State did nothing, which begs the question, why now this issue? Finally, Mr Chairman, I want to raise the issue of budget. If the Secretary of State countermands a decision of the Minister or directs action to be taken, how is that funded and financed, and what are the implications for the Northern Ireland budget of those decisions taken by a Secretary of State? Regulation 3 requires the Northern Ireland Executive to fund once they are commissioned. The Secretary of State can direct whatever he wishes with no accountability as to cost. It is surely fundamental to any decision that the person making it is held accountable for the public funds that are being committed to implement that decision. While Regulation 5 allows for some funding to be given, this is fully within the discretion of the Secretary of State. Indeed, the Secretary of State, by virtue of Regulation 5, could bind the Northern Ireland Executive in loans and contracts that are not in the financial best interest of the Executive, or indeed could be deemed not value for money. Yet it is the Executive, not the person making those decisions, who is accountable. The decisions the Secretary of State makes will have impacts and implications for other services in the Department. The Minister will be accountable, but will not have made the decision. The Minister may be left in troubling position of having to cut cancer services, stop initiatives to cut waiting lists and reduce hospital capacity, all because of decisions taken by someone else who is unaccountable for how that decision is made. The Northern Ireland Health Service is in crisis, there's no question of that. These regulations have the potential to further deepen that crisis. It is clear that these regulations fly in the face of democratic accountability. Constitutionally, they set a dangerous precedent. Financially, they are accountable. Democratic accountability from the decision and ignore the views of the people of Northern Ireland. For all those, I would urge the regulations that the regulations cease to have effect and members oppose the provisions. And in all pregnancies, both lives matter. I have listened intently to the comments from the Secretary of State, indeed opposition front bench, and not once has the baby in the womb been mentioned. Not once has the 100,000 lives that are alive as a result of our life-affirming laws in Northern Ireland been mentioned, and not once has there been an acknowledgement that in every pregnancy both lives do matter, and both lives are of equal value. There is much speak of financing adequate healthcare, yet no mention of the support and the care needed for those who actually do choose life. We want to have life-affirming laws in Northern Ireland. The will of the people in Northern Ireland is to have life-affirming laws, and these laws passed by this House fly in the face of that. And I would encourage members to step back from progressing these regulations and listen to the views and the people of Northern Ireland, and let the Northern Ireland Assembly deal with this issue, which is a devolved issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's a pleasure to speak in this. I know I have to say, isn't it a pleasure when we speak about the issues that we have before us, and I concur with the comments of my honourable friend and colleague for Upper Ban in relation to it. In the past, Mr. Chairman, I've spoken in all these debates on abortion, whether it be in the Chamber, when it's come forward. The Secretary of State, I'm disappointed, Secretary of State, I have to say, I'm bitterly disappointed where we are today. I concur very much with the policy, Mr. Chairman, that both lives matter, and that one is equally important as the other. And I concur and very much want to have for the record that 100,000 lives and babies and adults today are alive because of the legislation that we had in place prior to this taking place. So it's a great disappointment that we find ourselves here. I also wish to represent the viewpoints of my constituents in Strangford, and the majority of who are also opposed to this legislative change that we have proposed before us here today. And it is, whether or not we like it or not, in the debates in 2021 that I spoke upon, fundamentally abortion in the matters covered by the 2018 CEDAW report are devolved matters for Northern Ireland. They make that very clear in the legislation that we have and the background information we have before us as well. I have to say that when I look at it, I'm greatly discouraged by what I see here. Committee made recommendations under two headings: paragraph 85, which referred to legal and institutional framework, and paragraph 86, Mr. Chairman, referred to sexual and reproductive health rights and services. All of these areas of criminal justice, health and abortion are devolved matters. The Secretary of State and referred to, and I think his words were that he feels that he, as Secretary of State, has to do this for the reasons that he's put forward. But he does take the devolved administration's role out of their and into the Secretary of State's hand, and that disappoints me. It gives, according to the House of Lords, extensive powers given to the Secretary of State to do things over the heads of elected representatives. So again, those things are I feel, take us a stage far too far. The wider powers that he has, the act without the ability for Northern Ireland citizens to hold him accountable to the democratic process. Only the people of Northern Ireland can make him accountable. Maybe he might wish to put his name forward for Northern Ireland for representation, and then the people will speak. I say that with genuine respect for the gentleman, but it does feel to me like the real devolved powers has taken out of our hands. Indeed, nearly 4 years to the day, the Secretary of State, and I quote, and I remind him of this, in 2018, he recognised this key principle and said at the time of abortion, it would not be appropriate for Westminster, his words, not mine, Chairman, to seek to impose its will or to be the arbitrator of it that has long been devolved to the people of Northern Ireland. Again, it's disappointing when we see where we are. There is some concern from international perspective of law as well, and I know that CEDAW and CARE and how they had pursued this, which show that that international necessary back up where we are here. Whenever the Secretary of State maybe finishes at the end or is up at the end, maybe he might wish to comment on that. But I think it would be important that he does so. And also feel that the bill today dishonours the devolution settlement, which I adhere to very strongly. I wish to see in its entirety become where we are, that the responsibility, the accountability lies clearly with politicians in the Assembly back home. Last year, government acknowledged about the CEDAW report, and I quote, those recommendations are not binding and do not constitute international obligations. Now, if they don't, then why pursue something that very clearly is not legal internationally, as we've been indicated. Also, some 79% of the responses agreed with the introduction on a devolved matter in the consultation process that took place as well. Again, I say these things, Mr. Chairman, for a purpose, is to add up and construct the opposition that there is, whether it be from people in Northern Ireland, whether it be from international law experts, whether it be from the respondents to the original consultation. It is into that context that we must remember that government has flouted, and I use these words on purpose, flouted constitutional conventions and due process from the fast tracking of the 2019 Executive Formation Act to drafting the regulations with no consultation with lawmakers in Northern Ireland. Again, incredibly disappointing. Disregard for the opinions of law in Northern Ireland, disregard for the politicians in Northern Ireland, disregard for the opinion of people in Northern Ireland. There are legitimate reasons why the Secretary of State can act and give directions. The Northern Ireland Act 1998 foresaw this need and set out the reasons in section 26.2 that the Minister can give direction if he considers any action capable of being taken by a Minister or Northern Ireland Department is required for the purpose of giving effect to any international obligations or safeguarding the interests of defence or national security or protecting public safety or public order. I suggest very respectfully that by doing what the Secretary of State has done, he has taken away the power from elected representatives and put it into the hands of himself here and this House. I'm as British as anybody, Mr. Chairman, maybe more British than most people, I would say perhaps, but I wish to see the power lying with the Northern Ireland Assembly. I just find myself in a very, very difficult position today, and it's something that I feel strongly about, and my constituents feel strongly about. Mr. Chairman, when the government consulted on abortion law in December 2019, not for 1 second imagine we would find ourselves to be in with the Secretary of the power that he's grasped, but in fact to act as the Minister for Health, or as if he were the Department of Health. In some of the background information, I'm sure that the figures are probably maybe greater now, but since March 2020, it refers to 1,345 laws lost due to the abortion law. That's 1,345 people that would be alive today, young babies. And I'm reminded of the 100,000, the grander figure for lives that have been saved in Northern Ireland as well. Again, figures that can't be ignored, nor should they be. But just let that thought sit for a moment. Regardless of whether you agree with the content of the 2020 regulations or not, these powers are unimaginable in a Scottish or a Welsh context. Again, Mr. Chairman, we in Northern Ireland, so often happens, and this is another example of it, we find ourselves being pursued by the Secretary of State here, and the same pursuing of law legally or otherwise would never happen in Scotland or Wales. On what other topics in the future might the Ministers step in and take, in the words of the secondary legislation in the other place, extensive powers? So this is a constitutional issue, as my honourable friend, the honourable member for Upper Bann referred to, and I suspect that one of my other colleagues will refer to as well. Powers that have nothing to do with international obligations, defence, national security, public safety or public order. If it was those things, I would say we would be on the same page. But here's something that fundamentally changes against the will of people in Northern Ireland. And Mr. Chairman, it's with that heavy heart that I put that forward. Powers that have no local democratic accountability. Northern Ireland voters cannot remove the Secretary of State. If only they had, and only they could. Last year I asked the Minister to explain what precedent there was for the powers taken in the 2021 regulations, given that the 2020 regulation does not require that services must be commissioned. I didn't get an answer then, but again I'll ask the same question again, since these regulations give even wider powers than what there was before. Mr. Chairman, it's just not the constitutional issues that these regulations raise that concern me and concern my constituents and concern a vast majority of people across Northern Ireland. I raised some of the practical issues on departmental budgets last year. My honourable friend for Upper Bann referred to it as well. Regulation 3 requires the Northern Ireland Department to fund abortion services only once they are commissioned. And again, that perhaps maybe poses a question. in relation to the funding aspect of it. Regulation 5 suggests that the government might provide some additional resources to do so, but I understand that there is an obligation upon the department to provide the extra financial obligation. So maybe Minister Secretary of State, at the end, that may be one of the questions that I think we need clarification on as well, so to ensure that the funding mechanism is in place, which I understand according to this legislation and the legal framework that indicates that it needs to be done. When asked the Northern Ireland Office to confirm that sufficient funding is there to provide these services, the Northern Ireland Office said, as a devolved matter, it remains the responsibility of the Northern Ireland Executive to fund abortion services in Northern Ireland. But the legal opinion that we have here seems to indicate that the department has an obligation to fund. So I'd ask the Minister whether his officials have read the regulations which bypass the Executive and suggest that additional funding might be available. And will the Minister perhaps maybe just clarify the status of Regulation 5? If government is not planning on providing new money and the Secretary of State decides to act in place of the Minister of the Department of Health, or in doing so commits funds that are already spoken for in other parts of either the health budget or other parts of the Northern Ireland Executive, what will be the impact upon other services? I think there are implications here. We need to understand that. We need to know that, and I think the Department of Health and the Minister, Health Minister there, and the MLAs all need to have clarification on that matter. What will be the impact on other services? How is that to be managed and implemented in a fiscally responsible manner and method? I'm sure the Minister and the Secretary of State will say it's not his intention to use these powers, but the fact remains that they are sitting on the statute book, and he's sitting on the statute book, and the papers aren't open. So why overrule the Northern Ireland Assembly? Give the power, let them make the decisions, ensure that the financial obligations are one that can be funded legally as accordingly they should be. With that in mind, when it comes to a vote here, as I've always done, as I continue to do, because I feel strongly about it, both from an emotional point of view, from a moral point of view, from my constituents' point of view, and I believe that my duty in this House is when I see something wrong in this House, as I do in all the things that I do, Mr. Chairman, if something's wrong, I will vote against it. I try to highlight those things as well, and today, whenever the opportunity comes to cast a vote in this committee on this delegated legislation, that I will be opposing this with all my heart, as I've done in the past and will continue to do now and for the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I suppose when you, sir, signed up to be chairman today, and other members put themselves down for an SI committee on a mid-morning of a Thursday afternoon, they probably didn't expect it to be a long committee, but I think that, such a well-attended committee as well, but I do think that says something about the importance of this issue and the effect and the impact that it does have on people all across Northern Ireland. Indeed, the biggest postbag I've received in recent days hasn't been about the protocol, hasn't been about the collapsed assembly. It's actually been about this issue. And I think that says something about the interests of constituents, that this matter does need to be discussed. Now, the Secretary laboured quite strongly today the point of his legal right to do certain things and his legal right to introduce this SI to us today. But I think if that is the case, I think we bear in mind the absolute truth that this damages the Belfast Agreement. And if you want to understand why I say that, Mr. Chairman, well, all you have to do is read what is in front of us, and Clause 2 spells it out abundantly clear with these words, that it's agreed today, the Executive Committee, that's the Executive of Northern Ireland, the Government of Northern Ireland, is to be disregarded. The Government of Northern Ireland is to be disregarded. So that every member is voting today on whether or not we disregard the Government. We will disregard the Executive of Northern Ireland. What does that mean? It means we no attention whatsoever to them, we ignore them. And if members think that that is without effect anywhere else with regards to Northern Ireland, I think they are completely misled, because this damages the Belfast Agreement beyond repair. Indeed, what the Secretary of State is trying to do elsewhere, Parliament does not at any point take upon it the right to ignore and disregard the Assembly. Why are the institutions in Northern Ireland not working, Mr. Chairman? and why then they should look no further than this type of legislation, this type of statutory instrument, which disregards, undermines the government of Northern Ireland. And people think that this can be done without really any serious consequences. Well, all I would say is that they can't say one day that they're going to plunder and trash the Belfast Agreement, and then in the next few weeks not have this put up to them again whenever they say they're supporting the Belfast Agreement. You can't 1 week in this place disregard in law, ignore, pay no attention to the government of Northern Ireland and put it into legislation in this place, and then in a week or two's time say we're fully supporting the Belfast Agreement. And that's not a challenge to the Secretary of State, that's a challenge to everyone in this House, across this House. And I think that colleagues should note that, and note that therefore when arguments are made about the illegality of certain moves, then one should challenge, is this actually, the Belfast Agreement is an international agreement, is it right that then we disregard the executive? It can't be right. And I think that we need to bear that in mind when we take this vote today. So this little SI committee in the upper committee corridor in Parliament today is doing something incredibly significant and will damage forever the Belfast Agreement. Make no mistake about it whatsoever. The Secretary of State in his comments indicated that this is a healthcare, primarily this is a healthcare matter, and that's why he needs these regulations in place. And as the regulation says in clause 1, they are for Northern Ireland only. Of course, I don't believe that abortion is a healthcare issue. Abortion is not the only alternative to unwanted or unexpected pregnancy. And those claiming the right of the unborn fail to claim the right, of course, for those claiming the right for the mother's life fail to claim the right for the unborn. And I think that is very serious. It's a point that was laboured, I think, very well by the member for Upper Bann. More and more medical evidence proves that the human life in the womb experiences pain, joy, noise, anguish, love from the very earliest moments, and those rights should be protected. This statutory instrument does not protect those rights, especially if we're going to ignore the government of Northern Ireland and its views on these matters. Now, the Secretary of State indicated that he was, and I quote him, he was obliged to act, that there's no, I will come to this point slightly later, but there's no serious public support for these very liberal measures for Northern Ireland. And the Secretary of State, when I asked him that earlier, I think he confirmed that these measures do go beyond what is available and what will be available in England and Northern Ireland. And clause 1 does spell this out, that this only extends to Northern Ireland. So if it was the same as what applies to England and Wales, there would be no need for one bracket C in this, because it's the same. But it's very, very specific. It's ruling out that any of this applies to England and Wales. Now, why would that be the case, Mr. Chairman? Well, I think it's important that we try to explore why that would be the case. Because the law in England and Wales does this in a very different way. But Section 9 of the Act, which the Secretary of State quoted in his comments, requires abortion to be provided in the following cases. There's a threat to physical or mental health, life-limiting disability, rape and incest. And what the government has implemented goes far what is required. And I did ask him about 99% of the abortions that have already taken place. Could he indicate that any of those matters were actually breached? He wasn't able to do that. Abortion on demand for any reason, including sex selection, through to 12 weeks would be permitted. That is not the case in England and Wales. This applies to Northern Ireland only. It's de facto abortion on demand for any reason right up to 24 weeks applies as a result of this. That is not the case in England and Wales. But there will be people in this House who will see this dramatic change and liberalisation in abortion laws in Northern Ireland and will say, why doesn't this apply to England and Wales? So an unintended consequence of today is that there will now be a campaign in England and Wales to change the law in England and Wales to bring it into line with what is happening in Northern Ireland. And it's already been mentioned in the main chamber that that is now an intention. Abortion is available in GP surgeries across Northern Ireland. This departs from law in England and Wales, which currently restricts abortion to hospitals or places approved by the Secretary of State. This means that abortions are available in a limited number of approved locations, not routinely provided by GP surgeries. Again, something which is very specific to Northern Ireland and changes the law. No requirements that a doctor must be involved with an abortion. Midwives or nurses can provide terminations. There is no requirement that the doctor be involved with an abortion, nor for the approval of 2 doctors before abortion can be performed. The penalties for men to use abortion pills and to slip them into women's food may be less severe in Northern Ireland than in England and Wales. None of those unintended consequences are dealt with, and I think that that is a serious flaw, and members should take cognizance today before they vote for this that Clause 1 supports the view that I put to the Secretary of State, that this is a much more liberal provision for Northern Ireland, and that it will be the impetus for changes nationally, and that is not what he has told the House, and should indeed be the case. Yes, you will hear lots of people about surveys that Northern Ireland really has changed and its liberal laws are very, very different. I know from my own postbag, Mr Chairman, that the opposition to this is from across the community and from across the religious divide in Northern Ireland, and I think that that is important to me. And the Secretary of State gave us a statistic today. I didn't catch all. He said that up to now there's 2,400 abortions have already taken place in Northern Ireland. Now, if this is about health care, I think he's obliged to demonstrate some evidence that this regulation was protecting some of the things that have been identified in the statutory instrument. So, for example, did any of this affect an unhealthy mother? Did any of this affect an unhealthy unborn child? Was any of this as a result of rape? Was it as a result of incest? And the Secretary said he wasn't able to give that material. Well, I think that material, those statistics, should be made available. They must be gathered somewhere. And I think that he's at those 2,400 abortions that have occurred in Northern Ireland in the last year or so have taken place with healthy mothers, viable pregnancies, healthy babies, and none as a result of rape, and none as a result of incest. And for some people to argue that this is to make sure that people are allowed to have this provision in Northern Ireland because they can't currently get it in Northern Ireland, well, there's lots of health provisions that we can't get in Ireland. There are certain operations for young children that can only be given in the Republic of Ireland, a completely separate jurisdiction. So is there an argument today that all healthcare provision in to do with anything must be provided in Northern Ireland? Lots of people from Northern Ireland travel every week to the British mainland, to the Republic of Ireland, for all manner of healthcare provision, whether it be for heart care, whether it be for other operations, other significant operations. They travel out of Northern Ireland. It is not as significant an argument as the Secretary of State places upon it for people to leave Northern Ireland to have certain provisions carried out. And I think therefore that that premise is flawed, and that the Secretary of State knows that that premise is flawed. Because this is not about protecting the most vulnerable. This is about actually providing the most extreme abortion legislation ever enacted in the United Kingdom. And it is shameful. And I know that my constituents are opposed to it. And I did raise earlier the point, the legal matter of the Down Syndrome Act. I was very proud to be a sponsor of the Down Syndrome Act. And we put in place in that Act regulations to ensure that the rights of Down syndrome are protected. And I asked the Secretary of State if he had taken legal advice to ensure that this was not. I don't believe that there has been specific legal advice taken on that. And I've advice taken that, and I would encourage the Secretary of State to agree that after today's committee, he will seek that legal advice. He doesn't have to tell us the content of it, but I think it's only right and proper that we actually get that legal advice, and we know that it does not run contrary against an act that this House passed only a matter of months ago. And I would encourage him to take that advice. Making something does not make it. I think that the fact that this legislation goes well beyond what applies in England and Wales, for the reasons that I've outlined, are clear that this House is today doing something that it cannot roll back from. It's undermining forever the devolution settlement in Northern Ireland. It is undermining forever the settlement with regards to abortion provisions in Northern Ireland. And the consequences will be many. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Free. And I rise to support the proposition in full one, my right honourable friend, and also the position of the official opposition, because there are basic rights engaged here. And I listened carefully to the arguments put forward by our colleagues in the Democratic Unionist Party. But I have to say, I have a number of observations about the Good Friday Agreement, which I think the DUP at the time opposed. I understand that has changed and moved on. But the fact that the executive is not sitting there and the DUP do not have the opportunity to exercise the powers with an executive is entirely a matter of the DUP's own choice. I think it would be a much more difficult position for the Secretary of State if the duties imposed on him under Siegel, he then had to wrestle with an executive that was then obstructing those positions being taken. Now, I regret the length of time it's taken us to get to this position, but I'm delighted that we are now finally here. And of course, south of the border on the island of Ireland, we can see what has happened in the abortion rights debate there, Mr. Tweed, and whereby the end of that debate in the Republic, after at the end of 35 years of a constitutional ban on abortion, then identified that perhaps only about 10 or 11% of the population were actually visibly engaged on the anti-abortion rights side of the debate in the Republic. And there were constitutional exercises, consultation exercises, enabling people to be informed about all of the issues. But of course it was the horrifying case of Savita Halappanavar, who then really changed the tide of opinion in the Republic, where she was not allowed an abortion because there was still a heartbeat from the fetus inside her. And eventually, by the time that heartbeat disappeared, it was too late to save the mother, and she died of sepsis that was then caused by the condition of her baby. Now, I don't understand how people can and actually say, no, she has got to die. And I think it's right that the people in the Republic have come to the decision that they have after. But I don't see in Northern Ireland that we can't ensure that the people of the United Kingdom in Northern Ireland have the rights that the rest of us have had since 1969. And this was part of the devolved settlement. It is the DUP's choice. They have opted out of that process, so they've not been able to exercise their constitutional rights to stop this measure being imposed. But it'd be a pretty difficult decision for the Secretary of State if the executive was even in place. But if it's not in place, the duty on him is absolutely clear to give the women of Northern Ireland the same rights that women in the United Kingdom have.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I rise to support the regulations today and to support the actions of the Secretary of State. And I suppose I should say that this is a rare oasis of agreement in what are otherwise turbulent waters at present, but if I can mix my metaphors in that particular respect. And speaking as a Northern Ireland MP, I want to give particular weight to the fact that there are many people in Northern Ireland who do support what the Secretary of State is doing in relation to these regulations and around the issue more generally. I'll maybe come to that in a bit more detail in a moment. Also, I don't regard this as being a fundamental threat to the devolved settlement or to the Good Friday Agreement. I think it's consistent with the Good Friday Agreement, in particular as a rights-based issue. Obviously, it would be by far preferable that the Northern Ireland Assembly itself and the Executive and departments were to take the action themselves. But I do believe that there are three bases in which the Secretary of State should be intervening in the absence of movement in Northern Ireland. Fundamentally, I do see this as being an operational healthcare issue. We can debate the rights and wrongs of the legislation that was put in place back in 2019, and people may have different views on the CEDAW report, but nonetheless that was the decision that was taken by Parliament, and if I had been an MP at that stage, I would have been a Northern Ireland MP who was supporting that amendment and the wider legislation. So the first basis for action is that this does flow from an Act of Parliament, and there is an expectation that will be honoured and fulfilled, and that hasn't been the case to date for various reasons. Secondly, there is general UK international human rights obligations in this regard. So while this can be argued as a devolved matter, it's also a matter for the UK as a whole in terms of adherence to those international human standards. And thirdly, we have a history where the courts have already intervened around abortion rights in Northern Ireland. Particularly notable was the Sarah case, which most members will be very familiar with. And that again sets the context where action at one level of government or another was going to be inevitable. In terms of the issue of local support, I would draw the committee's attention to two particular aspects. First of all, there was a vote in the Northern Ireland which I think in relation to a private bill that was seeking to adjust legal provisions around access to abortion. That was defeated by a majority of MLA, so for the first time there was a clear pro-choice in the Assembly. I think that does give some democratic look toward the actions the state is taking, and the evidence from opinion surveys and the evidence that there are complaints, but there are surveys, including one that was conducted by AM, that give very strong indications of strong support in Northern Ireland for change in the law in terms of local provision. The reality is that the Department of Health, the current Minister, is not acting in terms of what had already proceeded in terms of regulations from the Secretary of State. For whatever reason, he has been dragging his feet, and I think that is tenable or sustainable, and there are legal duties that he has to fulfil which he hasn't done so. There's also the issue of the vetoes in the Executive, and as the previous speaker has already lived in place in any event, and that approach is actually for what should be the implementation of the law. The current status quo isn't really tenable or sustainable either. At present we have trusts, partial basis, offering services. Sometimes due to staffing or resourcing issues, they will come and go, and so therefore there's not a consistency of service either across Northern Ireland or within trust areas as things have tended to fluctuate, and that does give considerable credence to the need for a consistency of service through a general cleaning of services across Northern Ireland being put in place. The second point we have to acknowledge, and I do take note of what the member from Northern Ireland are still going to go across to Great Britain to access what are healthcare services that should be available in Northern Ireland. So people can put their head in their sand, put their head in the sand if they wish to in Northern Ireland, and pretend that this isn't an issue and it's not happening on their. But the reality is, women and girls over the past decades have had to go to England, and it's still happening today. And it's worth putting that in context as well. Often when this is happening. We're talking about what are crises. They are also situations where it isn't viable, and people are going through incredibly difficult experiences in that respect. There isn't simply the same network of support in terms of having to travel as the members of their local community. Although there is differential access in terms of resources. It is much easier for people with access to resources to travel to England or to book a hotel or whatever over here than there is for other women. We also have to be very alert to the fact that sometimes, and bearing in mind that my opinion on this is essentially a woman's choice, but there are many women who find themselves in what are essentially coercive relationships. And it is one thing to make a decision, a difficult decision, albeit that they don't continue with a pregnancy. And it's one thing to try to act in Ireland. It's a much more challenging issue for someone to have to travel away from to go to England to access service. The same thing applies if women who may well have an existing family and children that they have to commit to. May well be someone who's a single parent. Practical issues why this is not tenable for people to go to England, why the service should be on their door. Fundamental here about reproductive rights and issues in terms of reproductive issues, women and girls in Northern Ireland as any other part of the United Kingdom, and indeed, there's been a lot of talk of Irish Sea borders, but the biggest Irish Sea border is the rights and equality issues, and we need to ensure that one is removed by ensuring that there is equality. In closing, I do welcome what the Secretary of State has said today in terms of giving something in terms of times. I do agree with him, sadly, that I don't think the Health Minister in Northern Ireland in this particular regard, and it is with regret, but I think we'll have to intervene, and I do welcome the clarity he has given that as soon as the preparation is done in terms of his own officials, in terms of the unit he has established are ready to go, that he, a matter of weeks, I think it's the same thing, but it would be useful if we just clarify that. And I appreciate you may want to put that on things today, but certainly with my preference that this issue is finally resolved.
Thank you. I would say a wide range of views across. I think highlight the point I made at the beginning. This is an issue that people have strong views on. We've seen varied contributions. It's something I do respect. People have those views. Well, I think again it's quite right. This is people are able to vote with their today. I would just want to points that are raised, and just to start by saying again, I think this today is not about on the provision of abortion service. That was decided by this House some time ago. The framework was established. The point today is around the powers that we can take to ensure that we're delivering on what this House has already decided for Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom. This is an emotive subject, but ultimately I'm not going to lose sight of the reality of the needs of women and girls to have access to good quality healthcare. They are at the heart of this matter. It's not acceptable that women and girls in any part of the United Kingdom are unable to access basic healthcare. That is something I think in Northern Ireland has been delayed for too long. And I think it is right that they're able to make informed individual decisions with proper patient care, provision of information and support from medical professionals based on their own health as well as wider circumstances. Similar, as some colleagues have said today, and the opposition on bench, I really do appreciate the remarks of the member from Gower, similar to what people can do, women can do across the rest of the United Kingdom. I would just say, and just answering some of the key questions that people have raised today, the honourable member for Gower raised some questions around telemedicines. I am keen to ensure that this is an area that we do work on. I'm aware that the current regulations do not directly allow for telemedicine, and I am minded to take action to support women in Northern Ireland having the same across the United Kingdom. So I do take her point on board, and that is something I'm minded to do as well. I also appreciate her comment around cross-party. Cross-party individual members have their own views, but I think certainly from the front benches, there is that cross-party support and wider support across the House. Really would support an engagement from all parties and all members who support women and girls and the NGOs who do excellent work. She's absolutely right in Northern Ireland on this matter. Obviously, some of the meetings we have them are preferred to do them in very small groups. And organised some of the NGOs things, but I think the point about this being cross-party is absolutely right. And I think in terms of the next steps, which answers the point I think raised also by the honourable member for North Down as well, it will be that the team that we have now got working on commission in the Northern Ireland office will complete as quickly as possible. Our clinicians who have experience in this area, they know what they don't expect that to take very long, and then I am very keen that we quickly, which also plays into answering one of the part of the honourable member for Strangford, who as ever gave a strong and an impassioned speech when he asked, I think one of his questions as well was that this, we need to understand that the legislation that's before us today, this statutory instrument, gives a power to the Secretary of State, and we need to be conscious whether the State actually intends to use it. And I'll be very, very unapologetic and very clear, yes. I think the Honourable Member for North Down is sadly correct. I do not expect the Minister for Health and Department of Health to take this forward. I would encourage him to do so. I'm still going to give him a little bit more space to do that, but my experience of the last 2 years is I think he fundamentally won't, and I expect to be using these powers relatively soon, sadly, but I will do that, and I don't want anybody to be under any misconception about that. A question has been raised by a number of people around, not unreasonably, around the point on finance. I think members, both the Honourable Lady Member for Gower, the Honourable Lady and Member for Upper Bann, I think Member for Strangford, Elise, and maybe the Member for North Antrim, I can't remember, but certainly the others, all raised the question around finance, which I think is a very reasonable point, a fair question. We've been clear from the time of the public consultation in 2019 onwards that our actions in the provision of services for the provision of abortion in Northern Ireland were the result of legal duties imposed by Parliament. They're not a UK government initiative actually, but as a devolved issue, the cost should be met from the resources available to the executive, including the Northern Ireland block grant, and that hasn't changed. I would just say on the finance point, as a couple of members have said about the difficult decisions we all have to make. Absolutely right, everybody has to make around decisions on budget and the implications of deciding to do one thing as opposed to another. These are the difficult decisions that the Northern Ireland Executive has to make. That's why it would have been in the interest of the Northern Ireland Executive for the Minister to have made this decision already based on the provision within his budget. I would, though, just gently point out to colleagues that on the Northern Ireland Executive, even when it was fully functioning over last year, the Executive managed to underspend its block grant by over £200 million, even aside from COVID money. I suspect we're going to find at the end of this financial year, when the figures are calculated, the underspending is going to be substantially higher than that. On top of that, I've just managed to secure for the Treasury in the budget that we have seen for the Northern Ireland Executive going forward as part of the spending review, the biggest settlement, around £15 billion that the Northern Ireland Executive has had since devolution began. That's a record figure following years of the Executive consistently underspending by hundreds of millions of pounds. So the Department of Health cannot argue, the Executive cannot argue that it does not have the money to provide this service. It does, and it actually has surplus money that it can be put into this and other services. It's another reason why I would support, and I think my honourable friend, the member for Reigate, fairly made the point that if the Executive was up and running, it could be making these budget decisions itself, and I would encourage it to be doing that as quickly as possible. As I say, I think I covered in my opening remarks the point about devolution. I fully support devolution. I would absolutely much prefer, and we have spent 2 years working with the Department of Health to see them deliver this service as part of devolution. But there is not just, and I'm not going to hide behind the reality, the Honourable Member for North Antrim said about me referring to a legal right. I'm not sure that I did. What I referred to is a legal duty. There is a legal duty on me to do this as the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. But I will go further. I'm very upfront about this. It's not just a legal duty. I see this as a moral duty to ensure that women and girls in Northern Ireland have access to the healthcare support that women across the United Kingdom does. And as I've just mentioned with telemedicine, there's an example where this actually is not yet even going as far as the rest of the United Kingdom, but I do intend to revisit that at the earliest opportunity. Yes, absolutely.
The Secretary of State has said he feels it is a moral duty. Can I outline to this committee what his moral duty is to the unborn, to the baby in the womb that is actually being killed in the act of an abortion? Can he outline what he feels his moral duty is to that?
Look, the Honourable Lady, I think, in asking that question, highlights why it is important that a vote like this is one that people can make on conscience. She clearly has a very, very strong view about this and strongly held views, which I absolutely respect. I would just say, from my point of view, the duty we have to that fetus and to the mother is to ensure that they have access to the full range of healthcare support and advice and medical advice that any other woman in the United Kingdom would do, so that that woman can make the right decision for her and for her unborn child or the fetus in the decision she's going to make. The best way to do that is to make sure that these provisions are available in Northern Ireland. Look, as I say, I know we've heard concerns about respecting devolved institutions, devolution institutions, and I think, no, I'm just going to make a bit of this. And I think I've been repeatedly clear about our desire to work with the Executive and the Minister. But as I say, it has now been over 2 years, and at every stage we've sought to get these services but locally, and the Department of Health has failed to do that. Now we do have to act, I think, in the best interest of the service of women and girls in Northern Ireland. Yes, giving space to the Department of Health to make the right decision and do the right thing at the last opportunity if they can, but being very clear that I suspect that it won't be the case, and I'll give way one last time.
You're most kind. Just to follow on from the point of the honourable lady from Upper Banmade, on the advice that's given to women and girls who wish to have an abortion, within that advice that's given, will advice be given on those who do? The suggestion, what we say, or the obligation to have an abortion, that some might decide not to go ahead with that, will all the advice be given to those who present themselves as wishing to have an abortion?
Well, I think the Honourable Gentleman, again, just for me, and I appreciate the position which he's coming at this from, but I say for me that's why it is important that these women and girls have access to properly commissioned healthcare support, so they are not getting support from unregulated, in some arguably illegal support from people that do not have the medical knowledge to be able to give proper advice and support, both whether it's for mental health or the physical health of the women and girls involved. And that's why I think it is important that we get these services provided, and ultimately that we are doing what is in the best interest and for the best care for women and girls in Northern Ireland, in line with what is provided across the rest of the United Kingdom. As if somebody who believes in the Union of the United Kingdom, I think all people in the United Kingdom should have access to the same quality of healthcare, and that is why I commend these regulations to the committee. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
The question is Abortion Northern Ireland Regulations 2022. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Aye. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. No. Division. If the two whips content that we can get on with it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Tonia Antoniazzi.
Aye.
Crispin Blunt. Aye. Jack Brereton. Aye. Claire Coutinho. Aye. Rebecca Harris.
Aye.
Brandon Lewis.
Aye.
Carla Lockhart.
No.
Julie Marson.
Aye.
Kate Osborne.
Aye.
Nicola Richards.
Aye.
Jim Shannon.
No.
Mark Tarmy.
Aye.
Dr. Jamie Wallace.
Aye.
The ayes were 11 and the noes were 2, so the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.
Committee Room 12, sound.
Ended. The proceeding has 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 ended.
Just before I call the ministers to move the motion, I've had a request for the gentlemen who'd like to move their jackets. They're quite entitled to do so if they wish. Right, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And I beg to move that the committee has considered the Abortion Northern Ireland Regulations 2022. In opening this debate, I would like to acknowledge and respect the deeply held members will have on this issue. And I'm glad that the decision of the usual has been made in terms of respect because of those views. I'm glad the decision of the usual channels to allow a free vote will allow